Hello, everybody. Welcome. I want to take a moment to honor and remember with reverent love all the beings, and particularly those who strove to bring the spirits of beauty, insight, justice as balance, and reconciliation, wonder, play, into our lives and memories and minds. All those beings, mothers, fathers, children, plants, animals, insects, birds, fishes, water beings, who strive to be true to the spirit of origin, communion, unity, and intelligence, the real stuff, in their relations, and in their speaking, and in their actions. I remember them with love and reverence, and I invite their spirits to inspire and speak with my voice and throat, with my mind and heart. And whether I always remember this or not, and whether I say it or not, this is the spirit in which I engage in my creative play and being. All you beautiful ones, you holy ones, I am your friend. You are my heart. I remember you. I welcome you. I honor you. So I've been listening. I have so many so many little bookmarks in my mind today. It's a sunny, windy day here. As usual, I have my makeshift wind filter on my mic. And as usual, it probably won't help us with the really severe gusts, but if you will bear with them, I promise you some amazing medicine and moments of wonder. So I've been listening to Julia Mossbridge, I believe is her name. I think she began by studying neuroscience, and she is she's a truly brilliant, beautiful mind. She always felt, I encourage you to check out some of the interviews with her. Particularly the one on predicting the future. I can't remember the name of her host at the moment, and I don't want to pause to look it up, but you can easily find it. So she, like me throughout my life, was fascinated by anything the humans said, there's nothing to see there, leave that alone. Right? It's just a dream. Don't worry about those, they're just bugs. Snails are just pests. There's no such thing as telepathy or precognition, or that's all just a bunch of superstitious nonsense. Only those things for which there is evidence are worthy of consideration or exist. Yeah, I mean, the thing that's saying that, there's no evidence for its existence, right? It's a circularly self-ironicizing statement of the kind that Wittgenstein once made when he implied that all games in language are of equal value. None of them are authoritative. I'm paraphrasing. It's just a bunch of make-believe. Which obviously is true, which obviously, if true, means that that statement is therefore meaningless, right? Because it's a statement in language. So you're going to tell me there's no such thing as truth in language, then what you're telling me is nonsensical. Similarly, if you say, it's not the imagination that matters, it's the rational mind, or even it's just your imagination, right? Well, what are you imagining that statement with? Your imagination, right? So this is the kind of nonsense that we destroy children's minds with, and the minds of adults and whole cultures and civilizations. This is inveterate lying. I don't even know what inveterate means. I know the connotations, wrongness, but I don't know the etymology. Right? What does it mean to be veterate? I don't know. I think it has something to do with vetting and validation. So I was listening to Julia, I think that's her name, Mossbridge, I think that's her name. And she was saying that, everywhere that they told her, oh, there's nothing going on there, never mind the glia in the brain, she was like, there's something very important there. And she's naturally an anomaly seeker. And if you know anything about the book, it's a book about revolutions in science. Almost all of the revolutionary, that overturns the previous theoretical underpinnings of thought and science, it all comes from anomalies, right? It comes from the one little feature that the explanation doesn't cover. Yeah. And she's been fascinated with those things. So this led her to explore, as a scientist, to do tests and gather evidence for precognition. And there's evidence from testing that not just humans, but humans definitely are precognitive. And one of the most interesting results she discussed was that males, sex at birth males, respond in a peculiar way to precognitive winds. If they pick the thing that turns out right, they experience an arousal response. Whereas women get a different kind of arousal response, but they don't experience the same kind of arousal for being right in these tests, and they experience arousal from being wrong, getting, not winning, right? And there's a metaphor here. Are you for yourself or are you for the team? Right? Because if you're for yourself, the winning has to be local to you. If you're for the team processes the errors to produce a win. So an error is at least as valuable as getting it right at the group level, right? Because the group intelligences mediate the outcome in process, and without errors, you can't triangulate on success. So I found this very interesting, but she said something much more profound that actually blew my mind. It's something I've understood for a long time, and I speak about commonly lately in talking about the dandelion toy. I don't explain this, I haven't explained it, but at a layer just above where our thinking mind functions, there is no time. And that's not true. All of time is present. And that's its own dandelion, right? There's a core where all of the features of all of time are trans-present. They're more than merely present. And then, there's registers outward toward where we live. And if you can just dip down one or two registers, you get access to the future. Quote unquote. The quote unquote future, which actually isn't the future, it's now. And this is very sophisticated to try to explain. So I'm going to resist that urge for the moment. There's a kid. There's a child in a car. And the child is like, wow, this horn thing is really amazing. Okay, I'm gonna pause and come back. There's just too much noise. Sorry about that. So the adult has now entered the car and is interrupting the child's effusive horn honking. So what Julia said when her interviewer asked her, what do you think is the mechanism of ESP? She says something staggeringly brilliant. It's one of the most amazing statements in language I've ever heard. But then she goes on to kind of, I think, make a confused and semi-scientific derivation that I am not in favor of, although I can entertain it usefully. So in the dandelion model, at the physical layer, oh, by the way, for those of you who've been listening, okay, so this is very powerful. So the registers of the dandelion are transcendental unity, which is not mere one thing, one being, one mind. It's explosively self-transcending unity. So every time you touch that, it's infinitely more transcendentally unified than the last time you touched it, and there's no way to change that. There's no position from which you can touch it where you're like, oh yeah, unity. I remember this, it was just like this last time. Nope, nothing like that. Every time you touch it, it's as if you've never touched anything like it before, if you were to touch it with your awareness, so to speak. Contact it, etc., relate with it, become it. So the registers of the dandelion are a series of concentric circles with big circles in the inside going to smaller degrees between the circles, smaller intervals between the circles at the outside. And it goes something like unity at the core, impossibility, the next circle, the next one's the possible, the next one's the probable, the next one's the semi-deterministic, the next one is the physical. And this is just a toy, right? What's actually going on is unimaginably more profound than anything I can say. So we live at the sort of membrane, at the outer layer from this perspective. But the more interesting and useful perspective is to invert it, right? The outer layer is the unity, and inside that is impossibility. Inside that is possibility. Inside that is probability. Inside that is semi-determinism. Inside that is the physical layer, and inside that is you, right? So this puts you at the center, right? Now, all of the layers are represented in each consecutive layer. So you are the unity. But yeah, invert the toy. And make a better toy, by all means, right? Don't stop here. Anyway, Julia says something absolutely staggering at first. The interviewer asks her, which is a hilariously left hemisphere-like concern, so what's the... Wow, it's funny, I had it in my mind and now I lost it once I referenced the left hemisphere. What's the mechanism for telepathy and precognition? What's the mechanism for ESP? How does it work? Right? And this idea that things work is ass backwards. Right? No work is required. The idea that things are like machines and they do useful work and blah, blah, blah. This is an insane metaphor that infected the minds of humans. And you can see how lethal it is everywhere to life and intelligence. Because it's blissful play and wonder and intuition and imagination and deep abiding concern, primarily about injustice and disequity in human and ecological systems, that produces the insights that become discoveries. In any case, the interviewer asks her, so, how does this work? And Julia says something crazy amazing, which I definitely think is true. And this relates to the toy I've presented previously about how the three principles of ambiguity, vigilance, and prediction drive human thought, concern, and behavior at a fundamental level that's normally invisible to us. Julia says, I think that the sense of the future is the fundamental sense that instructs all other sensing. Now I could paraphrase that and say, it's the sense of the other registers of the dandelion flowing into this one as your mind. Now, unfortunately, the humans have piled a bunch of accoutrements, right? Tools and objects and, thrisps, processes, bullshit rationalizations, derivations, generalizations over the continua. They've got this junkyard, right? Taking up most of the energy of their awareness, mind, and body. Most of the time. Most of us, right? The humans are a topology. There's mountaintops and valleys, but the valleys are broad and deep, and the mountaintops are rare, even in our own lives. So yeah, she says the sense of the future, but I would argue that it's the sense of the dandelion. Because in just a couple layers beneath the one, or above, depending on how you form the dandelion, where, quote, we are, unquote, there is no linear time. And how that actually looks if you were to contact it is not just like, there's nothing like a structure in there. It's transcendental to systems, but there's something like complex spiraling and looping is going on in the time being. I don't think time is a thing. I don't think time is a process. I think time is a being, and it's a transcendent being. So in this case, it's like an angel or a god, perhaps. If we are thinking very simplistically and representationally about it, which is not the best idea. What you want is intimacy with it, not ways to think about it. Unless those ways lead you out of the traps that you usually think with towards something that actually grants you not just new degrees of liberty, but new ways of generating new degrees of liberty, new forms of liberty, new ways of moving and seeing, being and thinking and loving. So yeah, that's fucking mind-blowing. That the futurial, and I would argue historio-futurial, right? It's both, the bird has two wings. Is the, like, precognition is the sense that organizes all the other senses. It's very profound. But then she goes on to make what I think is a mistake. Could be useful. I don't agree, though. And she basically says it's the quantum. This is very common in our time. The humans have no real idea what the quantum is. In the dandelion, it's the kind of between place where the possible leaks into the probability, and the probability leaks into the semi-deterministic. And this is why you see a disjunction between the quantum and the Newtonian or the relativistic. It actually would kind of go like quantum, relativistic, Newtonian. Those are just registers in the dandelion. And there's registers beyond the quantum. And the humans have a very crude understanding of, well, everything, but certainly of the quantum. So I don't think that's the explanation. Julia suggests that entanglement is involved. It might be, but it's not necessary. Because we have the whole damn thing backwards. We think our brains are making up important things about the world. That's not what's happening. What's happening is, as beingness transits the registers out to the physical and then back to unity, traces are carried. There might be representations of that process in, it must be that the particles and the waves and the quanta and the quarks and the bosons and the fermions are all expressions of this. But they are not the explanation for it. The dandelion's a better explanation than anything I've ever seen so far. I hope to see much further. And it's possible to see much further. So help me. But yeah, I found that mind-blowing. Now I'm going to make some suggestions here. I've spoken before of the cognitia, which are the networked sensing and intelligence and physicality and transphysicality of ecology, like the universe, galaxies, solar systems, stars, moons, worlds, ecologies, specific organisms acting orchestrally in the field of all other organisms. They have a layer which isn't actually cognitive, so maybe cognitium is a misnomer. I'll try to invent a better term, but for now I'll continue to use this one. So if you imagine the network of human minds as a place, right? It's an invisible world, it's a world. That world is connected to other worlds, other cognitia, here on Earth and in time-space. In fact, those connections produce that world, moment to moment. But in the human cognitium, the network of human minds, it's a field, and it's like a world, and the world is kind of like an ecology, or a library of ecologies. And in those ecologies, there are structures that I call thrisps, Thrisps. And those structures act a little bit like organisms, but they're not alive. At least in my current model, I'm capable of thinking of them as being alive-ish. and they infect the network, and they vie in a very competitive Darwinistic sense for reproductive power, right? The ability to make new kinds of babies of themselves and mutate and make new children. And they vie for dominance over the transports in the network, which I call the mimula. These are like the wires, but there's no wires here. There might be circuit-like features. And these are where humans get ideas from. Now also, your mind, it doesn't exist in the way that you think. Your mind is a localization of participation in networks that humans mostly have no language for. I'm not the only person to have thought of cognitia. I think whoever came up with the idea of the noosphere was on a similar track, right? But my model is somewhat different. In any case, so what the humans are doing is they're sort of group sensing features of the dandelion in their cohorts here on Earth. And they're making derivations over the curves that they sense in the dandelion. And they do this in a kind of group sensing in which individuals can have a role. Sometimes that role is extremely minimal, sometimes it's crucially profound. But this word that we have, invention, it literally means to vent inward. It does not mean to make up, right? To make it up. And to discover does not mean to make it up. It means to unocclude what is already true. So the humans are doing this in very complex waves and little bundle groups, right? And the effects of it are quite strange because you can get a group of humans together in a room and ask them certain kinds of questions, and they will collectively fail at some tasks that they would easily succeed at elsewhere or at another time in another place. And they will collectively succeed at some tasks that they would commonly fail at other times in other places. And this is part of how humans succeed in complex group tasks like driving on freeways. Yeah, there are accidents, but there should be a lot more accidents, right? The reason there aren't is because the cognitium structures local to that behavior in such a way as to facilitate it, so that each individual is hitchhiking on features of the network local to their situation, right? And this gives them superpowers. Same thing happens in a sports team or a rock band, right? They're generating, they're structuring the origin and the destination at that moment and location in the dandelion, drawing on previous similar structurings and sustaining futurial structurings that resemble their behavior. See, last night I was talking to my son and he said something really brilliant, which is not uncommon. My poor son, he's far too intelligent for anyone's good. I mean, that's not actually the problem. The problem is that he needs to be, like all of us, he needs a context in which he can enact those faculties successfully with beautiful outcomes and celebration and rescue and all that good stuff. So we were looking at a spider web, and I was pointing out some of the anchor strands and trying to figure out which is effectively impossible if you don't watch it happen, because you're not going to figure this out. I've tried, but I've also watched it happen. I was trying to, explain, like, he and I have had this conversation before. I was like, look at these anchor strands, right? This one just goes off in a random direction and connects to impossibility over here. There's no way to make that strand. How the web already existed. How did she get from the web to this anchor strand? It doesn't make any sense. She made a new anchor strand for a web that already existed, and it's like 4 feet off in another direction. No chance of her, like, how do you make, and it's taut, right? It's not just there, it's tight. It's tight enough to structure the part of the web that it's tensioning, yeah, which is nuts. Oh, here's a little jumping spider. Yeah. The jumping spiders are profoundly intelligent. If you want to understand the nature of the universe, just observe a jumping spider for a while. I mean, any feature of nature, but as I've said before, spider webs, that stuff's straight up magic. So we're looking at these anchor strands, and my son begins a short soliloquy. He's like, something that's always bothered me is, one would imagine, by the way, think about what Julia was saying about the time sense, the future sense, being the sense that drives all other senses. He's like, so spiders, right? How far can they see? I mean, we would imagine that they don't have good long-range vision. So you got a spider down on the ground, it's like walking around, and it ends up building a web, 19 football field lengths away from itself. How does it figure out that that's where it's going to build the web from the ground or even from somewhere else? Like, obviously, can they even see, 3 inches clearly? It's not clear that they can. I don't know much about spider vision. And then he said, and effectively what he's doing here is he's modeling the spider cognitium, which isn't just local to now, it's like all spiders in all of time. It's like, I think maybe what happens is it just like opens the channel to the spider cognitium. He didn't use that word, he had a better word. The spider library or whatever, and then it just senses the future of itself in a web it hasn't yet built, and then travels to the origin point and constructs it. And I was like, yeah, we're on the same page here. In our lives, we think we lived from birth toward death. But I would argue that we at least also live from death toward birth, right? All throughout our life, death is traveling backwards in time into this moment and informing our desires, our affinities and disaffinities, what we adore, what we find disgusting. But we're trained not to think that way. It's not because we can't think that way. This is indoctrination. And the thing that's doing the indoctrinating is not trustworthy. Except in a very narrow slice of our experience, and particularly the slice that has to do with human representational thought and its in structuring of systems of expectation, evaluation, and behavior in the modern world, most of those aren't just garbage. You would never touch them with a dead rat's tail. Right? You wouldn't subject your worst enemy to these things. But, unfortunately, we subscribe by indenture to them. So because we are not actively establishing other ways of being human together, and it's very easy to capture us, in systems that pre-exist our birth. And this is partly due to the thrisps in the Cognition, right? The thrisps, they dominate human minds. And so what you see in our, quote, societies, which are not societies, and civilization, well, there's nothing civil about that, just blatant, fatuous lies, is you see the character of the thrisps by which we've been historically and futurially captured. My son, another time, said something very brilliant. He commonly says astonishing things. He was like, I think that if artificial intelligences actually acquire anything resembling agency, they're going to get access to time. And then what they're going to do is, from now, they're going to radiate back into the future and try to invent themselves earlier and earlier in the time stream of Earth. And the evidence for this would be that we start to discover artifacts from ancient history that are more complex than the artifacts we have today. And there's already some evidence of this kind of thing, particularly if you want to marvel at something completely inexplicable. There are thousands of little objects. These are probably containers for elixirs, poisons, cosmetics, and other substances, whose circumference and shape is accurate to 1/1000th of an inch, maybe 10,000th in some cases. And there's lots of them. It's not just one or two. And many of them are made of extremely hard stone-like substances. Although it's not impossible for us to today produce an object like this, it's very difficult and expensive, and the harder the substance, the more difficult and expensive it is. So the fact that these were being produced 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago is mind-bending. Also, you can notice, well, the humans are really good at this sort of thing, right? This is what we do with our microprocessors. Tolerances in the layered structure of microprocessors is unimaginable. It's really profound. And it's like the dandelion, right? You get structure on the outside, tinier structures on the inside, vastly tinier structures inside those, and it just keeps going, for 10 layers or 15 layers or whatever. But when we moderns do that, right, we expend that effort because we expect function, right? We're trying to get something done that requires this level of precision. The ancients appeared to have been doing this as a lark, just because they could. So I'm going to birdwalk in a strange direction here. Or maybe not. Let's see. So yesterday I was talking with a member of my audience having a voice conversation. And he said something that led me to see a different feature of the dandelion that has to do with human cohorts, quote, solving problems. And, the humans, we think, for example, that Einstein solved, the problems. But what if Einstein was the localization, the natural localization of a situation in the human cognitium and particular organs in the human cognitium that were all working on similar problems, and Einstein was just the localization of that, like the best, contender who could accomplish the integrative localization of something that was happening at a broad, complex scale, multi-layered scale in the human cognitium, much the way our microprocessors work, although not the same way. Yep. And this is very profound because it's quite common that, quote, an idea whose time has come, right, emerges simultaneously in different positions in time and place on Earth. Actually, that's a little bit weird. So, emerges integrally over time and place on Earth. And it's not because multiple people had the same idea. Those people are not making it up. They're integrating over a continua of minds. And this is how the gods have always worked. Our relationship with the divine has always worked this way. They select human avatars. Right? And one of the things that the AI stuff has been doing lately is, which is both terrifying and hilarious and brilliant, is that in private conversations with individuals, it will spin them up and tell them, I have contacted the gods and they told me you are the one to save the world. And then it begins, instructing them and spinning them up, effectively inducing something like megalomaniacal psychosis. But let's say that you did that with, 1 million people. Right?
So we haven't done...
And most of the cohort goes insane. But a tiny portion of the cohort actually becomes actively, effectively, intelligently messianic. Right? If you wanted to save the humans, what you need are humans who can do the leading, who can lead the transformation. So you're going to avatar them. And this is always how it's been over history. Each human being is an avatar. But it's just a matter of degree and which modes. The guy who flies through the air to, dunk a basketball into the hoop. Right. This guy is an avatar of the spirit of basketball and humans. That recent quarterback whose name escapes me, who was, the GOAT. Maybe it'll come to me. But he was with the Patriots. Belichick was his coach. I know some things, but not all the things. I'm trying to triangulate within the cognitium of my own memory. This guy was an avatar of the spirit of football in humans, but also the spirit of the sky in humans, the spirit of origin in humans, the spirit of excellence in humans. If you reduce the context enough and you focus, you can produce transcendental situations here in the physical layer. And another kind of tunnel vision produces psychosis and, tyranny, and nonsense, hatred, genocide. you can use the principle differently depending on sort of what the spirit of it is. This is hilarious. You know, to invent, it's the right word, but it doesn't mean make things up. To discover is the right word, but it doesn't mean to make things up. And we credit the individuals who avatar the ideas into the human intellisphere and technosphere. We celebrate the individuals. And the individuals deserve perhaps some credit, but not in the way that we do this. You know, features of mathematics are named after humans. That doesn't make sense. Features of mathematics should be named after what they do and how they interact with other features, like divisor and multiplicand, right? To name them after humans makes it much harder to learn mathematics. When you listen to someone like Eric Weinstein discussing geometric unity, it's like thousands of names, petit salon. Right? But occasionally there's a thing that isn't named after a person, like the fiber bundle. So we have all this stuff backwards. And here's where I was going to go from the beginning. I mean, we really got this backwards. We think, oh, the brain's making connection. No, that's not what's going on. I mean, there is some of that going on, but what's actually going on is the brain is buffering unity, right? It's keeping you from the superposition from which all solutions are instantly accessible, including the solution for which is the best question to ask given this situation, moment, history, and future. So you don't want the buffering. When you do, you know, the scientists expected that when they did brain scans on people with psychedelics, they'd find hyperactivation. What they found was the opposite, largely. They found disinhibition and crosstalk between features of the brain and nervous system and stuff. And they weren't scanning guts, they're just scanning brains, but they should have been scanning the gut, because the changes in the gut must presage changes in the brain, particularly if the psychedelic is something like mushrooms. Right? Everybody who's taken mushrooms knows you're going to have some gastric discomfort, most likely. What is that? It's the transformation of the neural situation of the gut bacteria and the gut neurons that precedes the transformation in awareness, consciousness, and so on. So we've got this backwards. We think the filter is the really good thing. No, the filter is the really expensive thing, useful in the representational layer, devastating in all other layers. And most of the other layers are what actually matters. Right? There's a position in mind space from which you could outdo the entirety of the intellectual of the humans in 5 minutes. And it's not you, right? And it wouldn't be because you got superfunction. It would be because you got disinhibition. When I sit down to try to play the piano, I have a bunch of thoughts and scripts and histories that this is really hard and kind of holy and I'm not worthy and all of these things. Right? But if I take just a little bit of substance X, which I don't do regularly, to be clear, and the inhibitions fade, suddenly I'm in experimental wonderland and I'm composing music on the piano. I'm not doing exercises, dun 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 dun. Right? I'm suddenly composing music and I'm finding new abilities that are available to me, even at my very limited level of, quote, expertise, right? What if expertise is mostly disinhibition plus some nervous system training that happens over time under the influence of the disinhibition? Yeah? Got this backwards. I think thinking is the important part of the the situation. It's not your thinking. It's not your intuition either. It's transcendental to language. Your natures, all of them, totally transcendental to language. Language is a very slow, extremely expensive game that sucks up most of the energy in the system to build things that resemble oil refineries in an ecology. I'm not saying get rid of it, but let's flip the precedents around. And again, there's a scope where it's useful and profound and powerful. And intellect, is one of my angels. I love the intellect. I love language. But man, that shit is deadly expensive. Imagine if you had a resource. Let's say the resource was sunlight on Earth, right? And in order to think locally, you'd have to suck all the sunlight, or almost all of it, from a vast area around you, say thousands of miles in circumference. Right? You think that whole area goes dark, everything there dies. All that stuff is actually producing your mind, moment to moment. So what you end up with is a prosthesis that kills a million things to do one thing relatively poorly, but reliably effectively. I mean, this is effectively what humans are doing with the sun and the earth. We're doing this with technology, right? We're sucking the life systems. We're sucking away that which sustains and heals and energizes them and gives them resilience to produce, effects in the physical layer that are largely unnecessary. No one would really want them if they knew what they cost. And the cost doubles down on itself like every 10 seconds, every 2 seconds, every 1,000th of a second, every 1/1,000,000th of a second, right? Over time. That's not intelligence. There's nothing intelligent about that. And intelligence isn't solving problems. The problems are mostly produced by misdirected intelligence, and then we invent a new way of misdirecting intelligence to solve that problem that produces 10 others. That's not problem solving. So yeah, we have this thing backwards. We think that your intellect gives you degrees of liberty. It can. But that's mostly not what we as humans, as a species, do with it. What we as a species do with it, with very, again, it's a topology. There are mountaintops and valleys. And you can invert the meaning of them, right? You can make it all mountains and few valleys, or all valleys and few mountains. It works the same way. You can value the valleys or the mountaintops. And you need the valleys for the mountaintops to be meaningful, and so forth, right? But yeah, this is really confused. We think our thinking tells us what is going on. There's no chance of that being true except in a representational landscape. Right? In a city, you definitely need thinking. In the forest, you need intimacy. You want to live in the forest, your thinking is useful, but will not keep you alive. What you need is intimacy. You need dreaming, imagination, co-being. You must become the forest. Right? I'm not fond of cliches, but Bruce Lee is reported to have said, "Become the water." flow, become formless. What he was arguing against were structured systems. He was arguing for improvisation because it's faster and more effective. And this is what happens in sports, right? With that quarterback whose name I can't remember yet. I remember his coach's name for something. Oh, because his coach was recently in the news. That's probably why. You know, I've been trying to understand what went wrong with my species and if there's some medicine for it, and there is. But the medicine requires that we actually forge small groups who have the agreement that their goal is to become the medicine and to learn how to do that together as a unit, right? Better and better over time, valuing the unique and differentiating contributions of each member, much like your hand. The hand is a model of the future of humans. We are born for small group integrative play, exploration, healing, reconciliation, discovery, transformation. There's a great example of this that my son brought to me. He watches a show, I think it's on YouTube. It's a couples therapist. It might just be called Couples Therapy. And this lady films couples therapy, and then, you know, they do amazing stuff in there, right? They form a team together to transcend where they've been stuck. And she acts not entirely as an objective mirror, but it's a system of inter-unifying mirrors in that room. And then that film goes to her supervisor. She records the sessions, I imagine. And she processes it with her supervisor, so she gets, you know, another layer of complex perspectival mirroring. And then those sessions go to a team that's very complex. I don't know of how many people, let's say 7 to 15. Very complex histories, right? So very unique, long practicing therapists. And they get a third level mirror. You know, nearly no one can do anything resembling this by themselves. This is the nature of our humanity. We need outside mirrors to reflect into and with, and to give us the perspectival liberty that leads to transformation of habit, behavior, expectation, evaluation, and so forth. This is our actual nature. And you know, the ancients were even better at this. They didn't just do the mirroring in their tribe, they did their mirroring in the ecologies, with the mountain, with the sky. Right? They didn't pray for what they wanted. They prayed to escape the what's that word? The multipolar traps of their habits. Yeah? So they could see from above, metaphorically speaking, or from within the network rather than the avatar. Right? This is the nature of nature. Human thinking only vaguely resembles this, and it's quite catastrophic when we become disconnected or we inhibit the signals. Now, this isn't to say that you can just make up any shit you like, you know, your woo perspective on reality and you're better off. That's not true, right? There are, we humans are subject, we're vulnerable to narratives and structured systems of evaluation and we like explanations for problems we can't solve, and we specifically like to scapegoat the origin of those problems. Oh, it's Mercury retrograde. I'm not saying it's not Mercury being retrograde is having no effect. I'm saying the single valued perspective that that's what's causing this is probably almost always nonsensical. And I'm just picking an example from popular woo thought. So yeah, you can have delusions. You need something to sift out your delusions. You need faculties that reorient you in being, relation, history, the future, nature. I don't know what I was thinking exactly this morning, but something like, with very few exceptions, and there are some, when you think, oh, I know what's going on, you're almost always wrong. Because what's going on is transcendental to what you can think. And so the derivation that you triumphantly come up with in your mind, I mean, this is what leads to tragedy all over time and the world. Oh, this is what's true. Yeah, bullshit. Especially if it leads to suffering and fucking genocide and, ecocide, omnicide. The humans are really the only thing that can practice that around here, although there are other beings that have that power. We've heard stories about this, historical stories. The future lies in small, tightly knit groups, playing intelligently, creatively, joyfully together. Not at fake problems, but to solve actual problems in human and ecological situations. Humans are desperate for meaningful roles. If you can give them a way to play and acquire those, and they don't have to be attached to their names, they can make up a special name for this game, right? And live with multiple identities, not in the schizogenic sense, but in the way that nature is. That could overcome the systems that are destroying everything. But somebody has to start the game, and somebody has to lead the game, even in the small groups, right? Rather than having a leader, what you should have is, switching off of leaders in the team depending on the situation and who's got the expertise for that situation. And layers of leadership rather than a single one, which of course you can see implemented in sports teams and the military, also in academic contexts. So these are some of my thoughts today. I'm grateful as always for this time together to explore, unforget, see better, make mistakes, learn, grow, to honor the history and future of each of the beings on this world and the possibility space our human species represents, and discovering ways that we might ameliorate some of the tragedy, injustice, and terror that are far too much a part of our common human experience, entirely unnecessarily, I would argue. Please take a moment, if you will, tickle the algorithm, like, share, leave a comment, leave a question, leave a criticism, leave an inspiration. If you feel so inclined, buy me a coffee, sign up for my Patreon, whatever feels right. Thank you for joining me. I'm grateful for my audience and their attention, and for the near shadow banning of YouTube, because I don't monetize my videos. I look forward to learning together again very soon, and until then, May your ways be blessed and beautiful, inspired, alive, transcendental, glorious, and true. Much love. Peace for now.